Around my house, Elf is the winner for the best Christmas movie. Matter of fact, this week we're watching it. We've already set aside time. Figuring out that you may have inherited something that brings value to your life can be a surprise. Matter of fact, I've been looking at the subject of value this last couple of weeks. I found some things that you might not see as valuable, but if you knew all the story behind them, you would. Matter of fact, here's the first one. This is a 1982 penny, which there's a lot of those around, but this penny is unique. 1982 pennies have a little extra value, but this one, where Lincoln is supposed to be sitting back in the back of the memorial, you can barely see that there's even a shadow of that there. It makes it worth about $50,000. If you find that one, you might not want to throw it away. Hang on to it. It could change your 2021, for instance. Let me show you another one. Now, I don't know if you keep up with this stuff, but this is a John Deere TR590 wrench. Hello. Can you get any better than that? In 1917 and 1918, John Deere made about 100 tractors. They hired a special engineer who put out these three-wheel, all-wheel drive tractors. After 1 year, they decided this was not where they were headed. They bought them all back, blew them up, literally blew them up with dynamite. This wrench came with those tractors. There's only 8 of these wrenches left in the world that are intact. This one that you're looking at sold between $15,000 and $20,000 for that wrench. Its value is because it is one of just a few. Let me show you one more. This is a jersey that was game worn by Babe Ruth in 1928. It doesn't have pinstripes on it. You may notice it was a road gray jersey. And for Yankee fans, if any of you are here, this is really valuable. I'm talking slowly because as a Yankee fan, you'll need to hear more slowly. But it is so valuable, and it is valuable because of who wore it. It's not just the cloth, it's 92 years old, but it's not valuable because the cloth it's on, it's because who wore it and because of what that person did. You can find value in so many different ways. We're in a series called Home for Christmas, and last week we started off by saying home is where you belong. And we looked at that word belong. This week we want to hit part 2 of it, and it says this: home is where you are valued. When it comes to the subject of value and finding value, it becomes so important to understand that if your value doesn't come from the right place, you don't end up in the right place. Value is everything. Now, there's a passage in Scripture that is so interesting. There's none other that's like it. And it has to do with a time when Jesus finished 40 days of not eating and found that he was hungry, which I find humorous. Or obvious, either one. And the enemy took Jesus up onto a mountain. Matter of fact, let's just grab these verses real quick. They're from Luke 11:3, and this is where we start. It says, the devil said to him, he takes him up on a mountain and he says to him, if you are the Son of God, if you are who you say you are, if you're as valuable as you think you are, tell this stone to become a loaf of bread. So there's this, we call them the temptations of Jesus. And this first one that he lands with has to do with provision. If you are who you say you are, if you're as valuable as you think you are, then provide. You come up with this right now. By the way, if you haven't eaten for 40 days, anything in turning it into a loaf of bread is a pretty big deal. It may not sound like that big a temptation if you just ate breakfast or lunch, but if you haven't eaten, that is a massive temptation. The provide temptation was a big one. There was a lot hanging in the balance when Jesus responded to these 3 things. That's the first one. The second one goes on just a few verses later, and it says this: then the devil took him up, and he revealed to him all the kingdoms of the world at a moment of time. And he said, I'll give you all of the glory of these kingdoms and authority over them, the devil said, because they are mine to give to anyone I please. And his deal was, I'll give you everything you can see from way over there to way over, it'll all be yours. I think it's interesting, he said, because they're mine to give. That's a different discussion for a different day, but kind of an important piece of this passage. His temptation on this one was possession. I'll give you all of that. Anything you want, it'll be yours. It's in your hands. You never have to want. With possession, you'll find value that way. If you're as valuable as you think you are, do that. Prove your value through your possessions. Well, Jesus rejected both of those, and it led him to a third. And it goes like this, just a couple of verses later. It says, then the devil took him up to Jerusalem, to the highest point of the temple. So he's looking down over the huge city, and it said, if you are the Son of God, jump off. If you are who you say you are, if you are as good as you think you are, if you're as valuable as you think you are, just jump. And then it went on to say that the angels will come and catch you. In other words, it was this last temptation of prove, or maybe we'd say it this way, perform. If you are who you say you are, do the dance, do that thing you do, show off a little bit, prove that you're valuable. Well, in the end, Jesus' response to all of this was, don't tempt the Lord your God, which is a little bit of a flashback to all of this is mine. I think Jesus let him know that you're out over your ski tips. You're way beyond your depth on this one. Don't tempt the Lord your God. Those same three temptations, when it comes to the subject of value, are three temptations all of us are faced with. It is so easy to get lost in those three things. For Jesus, value was not what he did, his ability to turn stone into bread, or his ability to take all the kingdoms of the world, or to jump off. It wasn't based on what he did, but it was based on who he was. His value was that he was the Lord our God. He understood it, he did it. Therefore, he dealt with the temptation completely differently. If you don't have the who we are part straight, then the what we do will never be straight either. These three temptations will plague us our entire life. Matter of fact, let's look at those really quickly. When dealing with your value, not talking about Jesus, not talking about me, but when you deal with your value as a human being, which one of those three things gives you the most struggle? Because these three things give all of us some level of struggle. Matter of fact, it's kind of your application point for this week. I wonder if you would spend a little bit of time and ask some really honest questions about yourself. For some people, that provide temptation is everything. It's that I am able to provide a living, a home, a thing, protection, safety, whatever it is. And for a lot of us, it's how we find our value. You don't have to be a bad person, because those are all good things. The number of times I've sat with a husband and wife who aren't getting along and had, especially, it's not always men, but had a man who said, I don't get why she can't just be happy. I have provided her a home and that car and financial security and the kids, everything they need. I have provided. Why can't she be happy? In other words, he's saying my value in this equation is I provide. And hey, just let me say, if you are that person who provides those kind of things, way to go. That's not to be looked down upon. The goal of this is not to say, well, that's worthless. Of course that has worth. But if your value is based on your ability to provide, let me ask it this way, what would happen if you lost that ability tomorrow? It's why a lot of people who have something happen to them physically, a great singer who loses that ability, all of a sudden can't provide, and they seem to lose their life. Or someone who has had disability thrust on them through something, it's often so difficult because you feel like I've lost my value as a person, as a man, or as a woman, as a human. That provide is a big deal. Possession was the second one, and it's a big part of it as well. We don't ever want to believe it, but sometimes the ability to have more, to wear the things with the right names or the right look, to drive the thing that has the right name on the back of it, to live in a place in the right neighborhood. Nothing wrong with any of those. Drive it, wear it, live in it, do those things. But it is so easy for that to become part of how we value ourselves. Because we live in that community and not that community, we feel more valuable. Sometimes we save and work and dream and hope, and we finally get the possession, And then sometimes there's an emptiness on the backside of it because there's this reality that I thought that was going to bring far more joy to me than it did. But many of us, and certainly many people in our world today, are struggling because they base their value in their possession. And then what happens when the stock market goes upside down, or when you lose your business, or when whatever happens? We all have watched people who've kind of tumbled in that regard, and it is hard to find their value because so much of it was based on what they had, and what you have is fleeting. The third one of those is maybe the hardest of all. It is the prove or perform piece. It is the, I do these things, therefore I'm valuable. I'm good at that, therefore I'm valuable. For me, a lot of times I talk to someone and you hear that there are struggles. Sometimes if you're a mom or dad and your kids go past that little stage and they go off to school, and all of a sudden you're not needed quite as much in that regard, except for this year when you're needed twice as much, you know? But it is that feeling that I don't feel like I'm needed and I feel like my value is diminished. Or maybe it's when they get their driver's license and all of a sudden they're gone all the time, and as a mom or as a dad, you go, man, every day they needed me to figure out how to eat and drink and get dressed and have anything, and now they're so independent. Or maybe it's when you end up as an empty nester. And for many of us, it is such a struggle. And it's not because you're not valuable. It's because you don't feel the same value anymore, because when the prove or perform is taken out, it feels like I'm less valuable, I'm less needed. For some people, it's when they retire. They've worked all these years and they've been needed and they've been successful in what they've done. And often when they pull back from that, it's why there's a short lifespan for a lot of people. From the last day of work to the last day of life is a quick run, because they feel like they lose part of their value. I don't know where that is for you, but for many of us, if you took away our ability to do what we do, we often quit feeling what we feel. And the reason is that we find value in unfortunate places. So that's the way it is with value. Can I ask you this? Which one of those three places do you find places the most value on you? Or maybe it's somewhere outside of those three things, but if you don't know, then you live in a dangerous world, because if you find your value from anything outside of the who you are and whose you are, it will be a very shallow life. Now, throughout the course of time, there have been some interesting things that happen. We saw Jesus being tempted, and then a little bit later, as we continue reading, we find that some other things happen in Jesus' life that changed a lot of things for him. As you begin to look at his life, his value was who he was, but when he came onto the earth, he began to change some things in some pretty massive ways. One of the things Jesus did is he moved the target a little bit. When people thought of what it was like to be at peace with God, they had this understanding that being at peace with God was doing a list of things. There were a lot of rules. There were a lot of things you should follow, and they had been taught that as long as you follow those, you will be at peace with God. And then Jesus came along, and he kind of just messed up. He like blew everybody's mind. As a matter of fact, he moved the target so much that it confused people. I'll give you, for instance, people had often heard it read or said that for you to commit adultery with someone was a sin. It was wrong. And then Jesus came along and said, well, that is true. However, let me add to that, if to think or to look upon a woman with lust, he said to the men, is to have committed adultery in your heart. And people's minds were like, you've got to be kidding. Like, I built my whole life to try to be okay in this regard, and now you've moved the finish line. You've got a constantly moving target, and when you do that, it is impossible to keep up. Matter of fact, I just listed three things. A constantly moving target leads people to become three things. To become desperate is the first one. Because you go, I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know how to win anymore. It's like every time I start running that direction, you move the finish line over there. I feel like I'm running in circles. Not only desperate, second one, if a constantly moving target often will cause you to feel incredibly discouraged or maybe depressed, and maybe you've dealt with that. And then the third one is it'll eventually lead people to become indifferent. You know what they'll say? I just don't care. I'm tired of this. I'm done with this. No matter what I do, it's never good enough. And I think a lot of us have dealt with that in our lives. So here's the question for you. Have you ever dealt with someone who is just impossible to please? If they're sitting in the room with you right now, be careful. This is not a good time to start an argument. And our goal, while it would be exciting to watch from a distance, our goal is not to create arguments while we're watching online. But if you dealt with that, some of us grew up in a home with somebody who was impossible to please, that no matter what you did, it was never good enough. Or at least you felt that way. Now, the person that you grew up in the home with might not agree, but to you, it felt like no matter what I do, it's always going to be just a little bit short of where some people married someone like that, and you've dealt with that for years and years and years. Maybe that is part of your past story, and it may be part of your present story. Some of you work with people, and it's this feeling that no matter what I do, even if I did everything they asked, they would just move the target over here, and I would have missed again. That I'm shooting really straight, they keep moving the target. I'm running really fast, they keep moving the finish line. If you've ever dealt with someone in your world that has a hard time accepting anything is okay, then you know what I mean. Here's the worst of all. There's some of us in dealing with ourselves that keep moving the target. That no matter what you do, it's never going to be enough. That you beat yourself up on a good day and on a bad day. That you can offer grace and you can offer forgiveness and you can offer hope to so many other people, but when you look in a mirror, it's never been good enough. You wish you were, wish you could be someone else, some other way. That's a real deal. And for a lot of us, it is hard to find value in our life because we don't value us very well. Well, if you've ever dealt with somebody who feels like you can't please them, you understand what desperate looks like. You try so hard. You understand what discouragement or depression looks like around that because you reach a point where you feel hopeless until a point where you become hurt for so long, you reach a point when you just say, who cares? You become indifferent. You just give up. You just say, I can't please them. The problem with that is when it happens, it often splashes over onto other people in our life. Not only when you shut your heart to that person, it often shuts your heart to God, or it shuts your heart to the people around you who aren't that way. That it is so easy to become so hurt and so jaded and so calloused going through that it affects so many more people. And can I just say this? If you've grown up in a world where you were told you aren't good enough, you'll never be good enough, you're not beautiful enough, you are not shapely enough, you are not built enough, you'll never accomplish enough. If you've grown up in that world, whether it was you or a parent or someone around you or the people where you went to school or a coach or whomever that is, can I just say I am so sorry you've lived with that. We can talk about it, and you may be looking at a little phone right now or staring at a big screen in your living room or whatever it is. Can I just say it may just sound like words for me, but you know deep in your heart it is far more than that. For some of us, our deepest scars are around this, someone who devalued us. And as a result, it's hard for us to find our value just the same. If you've lived in that world, you know what I mean. Even if you haven't lived in that world, there's probably not any of us who don't recognize that it's in other people's lives. You may have been ignored or forgotten or invalidated, and I just want to say that's not the way life was intended. We can't take that back, but it's also not the end of your story, because if you're listening to this today, you are still breathing air, and it means that your life hasn't ended. Your chapters have not been finished being written. And there's good news. Some of us are longing so much for somebody to validate us and somebody to believe in us. I think if we could understand that, it would help so much that we can stop that. Matter of fact, I was watching a TV show this week, and I'm trying to remember even where it was on. They interviewed a guy, and it was a youngish, 20-something guy, and he had grown up a Hasidic Jew, and he talked about his identity was the guy who used to be I used to be all those things. I used to believe I couldn't cut the edges of my hair. I used to believe I had to go do these things. I used to believe I had to always comply. And what I figured out is that, this is his words, I figured out that there was a God that could not be pleased. And he said, then I began to understand that maybe I believed the wrong way. And I decided if he was a God who couldn't be pleased, then he was not a God at all. And what I've recognized now is I believed in a myth, and I don't believe there even is a God. I almost wanted to climb through the TV while he was talking and just say, hey, listen, don't write God off because you didn't understand the truth about God. For a lot of us, it feels like God is that unpleasable one. I'll be honest with you, for me growing up, that's been a challenge, that it felt like no matter what I did, even if I kept the rules, somebody would just make more rules. Even if I did it the right way, my right way was so short of what his right way would be. Maybe you felt that way. If you have, I don't think it makes you abnormal, but I just want to tell you there's something else that we can learn from that. One, there's this verse, and it may be the most familiar verse in the whole Bible. Sometimes it just helps to come back home. When we're talking about home for Christmas, here's a good home for you. If you've ever felt like there's somebody unpleasable in your life, if you've ever felt like God might be that one, how do you please perfection? How do you match up to that? And here's the answer is you don't. You don't have to. Matter of fact, John 3:16 says it this way. It says, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son. That he saw you coming, that he didn't. Has it ever occurred to you that nothing's ever occurred to God? He didn't wake up one morning and say, oh me, this is a mess. It's never going to work out. He saw you coming. This is how God loved the world. He gave his one and only son so that everyone who believes in him will not perish, but would have eternal life. He just said this, you don't have to find your value in doing. You don't have to find your value in looking. You don't have to find your value in knowing. You just have to find your value in me because I have chosen you. I have seen you coming. And you may have grown up with an unpleasable person, but I am not him. You may have grown up with someone who didn't see your value, but I chose you before you were born. Before you knew there was a me, I knew there was a you. That while you may not be pleased with you, that I see you as loaded with potential. And I gave my son who gave his life for you, and I'll validate you. I will see you as enough if you'll place your trust in me. And this is what the young man on TV, I wish he could have just come and sat down and could have shared with him the truth, is that the unpleasable God of the universe is not unpleasable. As a matter of fact, he saw you and he knows you and he loves you to the greatest degree. He even said, I love you this much. I give my life for you. And if you will just quit trying, you can be mine. There's you one. The only way you can come to know God is to literally quit trying to be good enough for God. And can I just say this, wherever you're watching from today, can you look back at a point in your life where you've said, God, I've tried, but I just can't. Because that sounds like the horrible moment of your life, but the truth is that's where freedom begins, is when I say I can't, because that's when God says he will. To be able to give up is one thing, but to be able to give over my will to his will, it's when I become a child of his. It's when he claims me as his own. It's not me saying he is my God. It is God saying I am his child. It's not my deal, it's his deal. Can you look back at a point in your life, just like you can look back at a point in your life and say, yeah, I was born on September 9th in 1900. That was the beginning day for me. Can you look back in your life and say, there is a place in my life? It doesn't have to be a time and a date, but a point in my life where I just turned over and said, God, I will trust you for my future. I will trust you for my identity. I will trust you. If you will forgive me, I will come to you seeking forgiveness, and I hand to you my life because you are the only one that offers me hope. Can you look back? Hey, maybe this would be the time, just in your spot. I don't know where you are, wherever you are right now, just to say to God, I give up on being enough. And if you will love me, and you do, and if you have chosen me, and you have, then I accept your gift of forgiveness and identity and value. For you, you know what we'd say? Welcome home for Christmas. That's what this season is all about. We don't just look at babies in mangers. We look at babies who came and grew up and lived a perfect life and gave their life and rose from the dead and offer us hope. That is the story. So if that's you today, hey, welcome home. Let me give you one more thing before we kind of wrap up. For a lot of us, we can look back in our life. For me, I look back as a young man where I made that decision. And I believe that God has done that He has chosen me to be part of His world, His family, His lineage. But for me, I was kind of taught this. As a matter of fact, I have a mom who used to say this all the time. And it's these beautiful, special words. And it comes straight from Scripture. I think sometimes they may get just a little bit twisted. But if you had asked my mom when she was alive, you had said, what is it? What is your dream for life? What is your goal? Big picture, 30,000 foot. She would have said, my goal is this, that someday I want to stand before God and I want to hear Him say these words. And some of you, you're already running out in front of me. I just want to stand before God and hear Him say these words, well done, good and faithful servant. And by the way, if that's your goal, that's not a horrible goal because, man, I have a feeling the heart behind that is so pure. I know my mom's was. I just want to be pleasing to God. I want Him to look over my life and say, yes, you did it. It is such a beautiful thought, but can I just tell you, it may be the most dangerous thought that you can live with if you're a person who's a Christ follower, because it sets you up for something. It sets you up for this constant treadmill that you can run on every day and look back and realize that I haven't moved as far as I thought I needed to move. Can I just tell you something? If you're a person who's chosen to place your faith or your trust in Jesus, this wonderfully awesome news that you are not alone in this. Your effort will not help Him say, well done. You can never do anything that would make God not see you as His child. And you can never do anything to earn any more of His love. Man, if you kill it next week, I'm waking up, I'm doing my stuff, I've read my Bible, I'm treating people around me, and God will not love you any more at the end of the best day of your life than He did at the worst day of your life, because He never chose to love you based on what you did. And for some of us, we spend our whole life hoping we can finally please a perfect God. And can I just tell you, the best news ever is He is pleased with you. He has chosen you. He has loved you with an everlasting love. Good news, you can stop. You can not stop doing good things. You can stop trying to be good enough to be well done, because you are well done. You are fully cooked for Him. If you think that you are good enough for God, your arrogance will keep you from God. But the good news is He never asked you to do that. As a matter of fact, when we understand our value in God, that's what leads us to live a life that is well-pleasing. Trying to please God to find value will never work, but finding value will always lead us to a life where we want to please God. And can I just say this to you? If you are tired, exhausted, your effort has been endless, and you still feel like, how do I please a perfect God? I have great news. You don't have to fight for that. He has already looked at you and chosen you, and you are His own. And as a result, I find my value as Chris Pace. It's who I am. But that doesn't make me valuable. Child of God, that is whose I am. And sometimes the value of something is not what you paid for it, but in this one it is. Because God paid the ultimate price for you. Because Jesus paid the ultimate price. And now it's not just because of what's been done for you, but it's whose you are, and you are His. And that is enough. And for you, you may not get to go home for Christmas this year. Or worse, for some, you may have to be home for Christmas. And neither one of those may be valuable places for you. But can I tell you, this Christmas, home is with God, and He values you. You are the top of His list. So welcome home this Christmas. So God, help us understand that my value is not what I do. It's not my ability to prove or possess, but my value comes from you, and I am so grateful that you've chosen me. Amen.